Hey Flock, Mike here from Epic Duck Studios, and welcome to the Epic Hobby. Today I'm going to be painting the Moldorf Bibliothecary from RELICBLADE. That's a mouthful. I'm going to be painting this character up in comic style, and I'm going to begin by just getting a little bit of a quick base coat on his eye lenses. He's basically wearing some goggles or some glasses, and I'm going to start by just giving the lenses a base coat of Averland Sunset. Now I want the beard of this wizard to sort of have that sort of like a dirty white feel to it, the kind of thing you think of like an old man who's been a lifetime smoker kind of has that yellow tinge to his beard. I sort of want that feel. So I'm starting with a bit of a yellowish base coat to begin with. I think this is Citadel Zamisi Desert. And I say I think because I accidentally lost the list of paints I've used. Normally I show them to the camera as I'm filming, and for some reason with this video I just didn't. And so I'm going to be doing a little bit of best guessing as far as paint colors go. I'm using a bit of a mid-tone blue to paint the mantle of his cape. I think this is Altayak blue, but again, I could be wrong. And for the cape proper, I'm using a base coat of Sotek green, which is just a bit of a darkish turquoise color. Next up, I'm using Citadel Blood Reaver Flesh, and this is going to be on a lot of parts. Well, I'm using it right now on his tunic. It's also going to be the base coat for his gloves and his boots. And next I take a little bit of light gray and just use it to frame in the lenses of the goggles. You know, just hitting that little sort of raised circle around them. And being very, very careful as I do so. I wanted to give the pants a bit of a warm linen feel, so I'm using Ushabti Bone as the base coat, even though it's a fairly bright, almost white color. Now, the Bibliothecary doesn't have a lot of exposed skin, it's basically just his nose and his upper arms, but I'm going to be base coating that with Bugman's Glow. Now, I'm also using the same Ushabti Bone as a base coat for the pages in each of the books here, because the Bibliothecary, as Biblio might indicate, carries a lot of books with him. And each single one you can see some edges of the exposed paper, and I'm just going to make sure all that paper, working my way around all the different books he's carrying, is base coated the same with Ushabti Bone here. Now for the actual leather straps, such as the one holding his backpack in place and his belt, and a few other little ones, like there's one around the backpack as well, I'm going to be using a darker brown, actually in this case Citadel Rhinox base, to start them off, and then I'll highlight that up later to make it a little bit lighter. Now, because there's already a lot of brown going on with this model, I decided I wanted the wand to look a little bit lighter, maybe a little bit like driftwood. So what I'm using here is Baneblade Brown as the base coat, and I'll highlight this up almost to white. Now, much like the wand, I didn't want his backpack to just be another brown in a sea of brown, so I'm using a little bit more of a yellowish tint here, and this is actually Baylor Brown from Citadel. Now, the Bibliothecary carries a lot of books, as the name might imply. He's got 6 different books in his person. There's 3 in his backpack and 3 under his left arm here. I'm just going to use a series of different colors for the covers just to make them look interesting. The books are a really great and easy place to bring a splash of color onto this model. The Bibliothecary also has 2 potion bottles on his back and a little jar up by his belt on the front. And this is another great place to bring a little splash of color in and do a little bit of freehandy work, so we can make the bottles kind of look like there's fluid in them, or the jar on the front has a label on it, so you can kind of do some creative stuff with that. Here I'm using green and blue for mana and health potions respectively. Mana's normally blue. I actually, in hindsight, don't know why I went with green, but there we are. And I'll be painting the contents of the jar in orange with a white paper label. The one detail I was really kind of undecided about how I wanted to approach it was his hat, and I finally decided just to go ahead and make it match the other leather details, kind of make it look like a cohesive outfit. So I'm starting it off with a coat of Blood Reaver flesh, which is the same color used for his boots, his gloves, and some of his other clothing as well. Now, because this is a fairly large, relatively flat surface, I'm going to make sure I get full even coverage on this. With a lot of the smaller details, it's a little bit less important that your coverage be absolutely perfect, because you're going to be adding a lot of highlights and other details that kind of end up covering up that base coat. But in this case, because it's such a large flat area, I want to make sure it's just a nice even tone before I start. With all the base coats down, I'm going to start putting some highlights in place, and I'm beginning by mixing some Xandri dust together with the Blood Reaver flesh, and using that to do a general highlight on all of the different leather parts, so the gloves, the boots, and the hat. Now right now I'm going for a bit of a cell shaded look, and what makes cell shading different from maybe normal shading is that the definition or the distinction between the base coat and the highlight is pretty stark. Basically, you've got solid shapes of color as opposed to smooth blends. So you'll see, there's a little area here or there where maybe the edge of an area has a bit of a transitional gradient to it because of the brushwork. And I'm not actively avoiding those, but I'm not seeking out smooth blends either. If a 1 or 2 happens here or there, I'm not really concerned about it. But in general, I'm trying to make these color breaks almost as distinct as possible. Now I've gone ahead and mixed in just a little bit more of the Xandri dust to get a slightly lighter color, and I'm focusing this now towards the magic wand itself. And the reason for that is I'm actually going to have the magic wand cast a little bit of light onto the hat and the glove, doing a little bit of experimenting with doing some comic style OSL here, which I haven't done before. So I'm just creating some lighter areas that actually point towards the magic wand. In the spirit of creating OSL, I also want the end of the wand itself to be glowing, kind of a Harry Potter Lumos sort of effect. So what I'm doing is I'm just coming in with some, this is actually a light gray, and I forget specifically which color I used here, but just coming with a color that's a little bit lighter than the wand itself and starting to focus that up towards the tip of the wand. And then I'll slowly build that up to white over the next couple highlights. So here I started experimenting with using a thinned blue glaze to tint the wand to give it the look of kind of a magical glow. And I try it out on the magic wand, but very quickly decide it's not the effect I want. So this is very much a very quick dead end here. Instead what I do is I take a light blue, and in this case I think it was Citadel Lothern blue. I just paint basically the outside half of the magic wand with that color, sort of from the tip down, and then highlight the tip again back up to almost white. Now to make the transition from magic wand to magic a little bit smoother, I've just mixed a 50-50 blend of the wand's base coat color with the blue. I'm just applying that at the transition point. And here's a quick little hit of near white on the tip of the magic wand just to make it look like that is the source of any glow that we might have. So this here is where I start laying in what I sort of assume would be where the light would hit coming off the magic wand. And I'm using one of the blues that I mixed up when I was painting the tip of the wand here. So not the white, but the blue just kind of adjacent to it. And what I'm doing is I'm basically creating really harsh areas where I thought the light would hit and just kind of saturate the area. This is actually a really common technique to do a sourced light in a comic books kind of feel. And I looked at a lot of comics to see how they created the illusion of light casting off things. Specifically things like Green Lantern is a great example because it's often either his ring or the lantern he's holding out in his hand casting a light. And it's kind of got the same sort of feel as a magic wand in those cases. So I went back and looked at, and especially older comics where colors were kind of broken down a little more simply. You know, I went and just spent a lot of time kind of looking at how it was done. And often the light is just a harsh bang of color on a surface. There's no transitions whatsoever. It's just, you know, you've got brown leather and suddenly there's a big blue spot on it and the blue is the light. And there's not a fade between one and the other. And this is really depends on the sort of genre of comic and the age of the comic. But it's done quite often, and also in Saturday morning cartoons and that kind of feel. It's a very simple way to create the illusion of just an overriding light effect. So what I'm doing is I'm basically painting in this really stark blue highlight in kind of an orb-ish area around the tip of the wand. Now, the little bit up on the top of the hat isn't quite reasonable. It's a little bit too far away compared to the light on the brim of the hat, but it really added to the look and the feel of the light, so rule of cool kind of won here. You can see I'm now coming in with some white and adding a bright point to each of these little reflected cast light bits, and the effect is pretty solid. It does the job of making the wand look like it's the source of all this blue all over the place. Now, with the hat, it's such a large, you know, it's kind of a big blank canvas, right? It's almost the size of the whole miniature, and it's just a flat disc. So I am doing a little bit of feathering out the blue here because it just felt really, really weird having this just, you know, blue smudge going across the hat. So to help sell the effect of the cast light a little bit more on the hat here, I decided to have the crown of the hat cast a shadow onto the brim and also paint a little shadow into the backside of the crown away from the light. Now I'm just using the base coat color of the hat here. And the reason for that is I didn't want it to seem like there was a deep dark shadow. There should still be just the normal amount of ambient light that the rest of the miniature is kind of experiencing. And just this kind of little faint hint of a shadow coming out of this. And I think it actually worked really, really well to give some directionality to the light, to really kind of guide the viewer of the model to sort of look at the wand as the source of that. And now here we're just back to doing some regular old highlighting. We're all done with all the magic wand bull and just getting, you know, nice little pink tip on the nose here. So what I'm doing right now is I'm working around all the different bits of flesh tone with Cadian flesh and just adding in an additional highlights. This is going to be really just on his arms and his nose because that's all the exposed flesh there is on this guy. And next up, I'm highlighting his beard with Baylor Brown, just continuing that sort of dirty blonde sort of color that I'm going for. And now I'm layering in another skin highlight, this time using Citadel Kislev Flesh. This is probably the last highlight I'm going to do on any of his skin, except I may come in on his nose with just a little bit of a pink glaze to give him that feel of whiskey nose, which actually, as I've learned recently, has nothing to do with drinking. Something about a big sort of pink bulbous nose just feels very dwarven to me, though. Next up, I'm going to highlight the dark leather straps. That's the one around the backpack, his belt, and the backpack's shoulder strap as well, using Citadel Bloodweaver Flesh. Now I'm going to highlight the leather areas as well as the brown clothing, which is basically his tunic on the front here, with first Steel Legion Drab and then some Ushabti Bone just for the final highlight. The brighter highlight is really useful for picking out the sharper edges, especially things like the brim of the hat or the very tip of the glove there where it sort of, flares and then joins the arm. So the trick here is to make sure that the highlight color isn't brighter than the light I'm casting. I don't want, the sort of natural light of the scene to overtake the simulated light of the wand. So I want to make sure that when I'm adding this bright highlight to areas like the glove and the hat here, where I'm adjacent to my blue highlights or my blue sort of spotlighting, that the blue light still looks brighter. Now I'm just continuing with more highlighting, going over the blue areas of the cloak with some Calidor Sky. Here I decided to take a little break from all the highlighting and paint a little bit of a warning label on the jar that he's got on his waist here. So I decided to do a very simple black skull on the white label. And so that's what I'm knocking out here. Basically it's little more than a circle with, a couple lines through it, and then some dots added back in to symbolize the eyes. It's pretty simple, but it is also a pretty small detail, so that alone makes it a little bit of a challenge. Now here I decided I wanted to flare out the ends of each of those little bones, give them that sort of really classic crossbone feel. So I'm just kind of painting a very small, almost like a serif across the end of each of the bones. And there's one or two spots here where I felt that was a little bit overdone. They ended up going on a little bit too thickly, so I'm coming back in with a bit of the label color and just touching up, making the lines just a little bit thinner. And now continuing with doing, the interesting freehanding details here, I'm working on the two little potion bottles on his back as well. So for these, what I'm doing is basically marking the top of the fluid level in the bottle. I'm doing that with a pure white line. Now, I'm going to be blending this out a little bit afterwards, but this is a really, really good distinction to make at the moment. Then I'm going to carry forward after that and actually make the bottle above that line be a very dark green. I wanted to give the impression of sort of like a dark green glass. Yeah, so here I'm coming in with the dark green. I think I was using maybe Dark Reaper or Sotek green. I actually don't remember which color this is. And ultimately it doesn't really matter. It's not blended with anything else. It's just the color of the bottle as if it had no fluid in it. And you can use anything for that, really. So here I'm taking the color that makes up the contents of the bottle, and I mixed it roughly 50-50 with the white to get an interim shade, and I'm using that to blend out the bottom of that white line. I'm still leaving the top of it pretty much pure white, but I'm using this to feather that white down into the contents of the bottle. Then coming back in with some white, I'm adding some little bubbles into the fluid to make it look a little more magical. There's really no other reason. Now, I decided that the white bubbles were a little bit too potent, a little bit too obvious. So I'm taking just a little bit of the green and I'm thinned it down. I'm just glazing over the white just to tone it down just a little bit, bring it back to the green, just, you know, by degrees. Following up on that, I'm adding some reflections or some really sort of sharp highlights to the bottle, which helps sell the impression that it's glass and not something else, something less shiny. So what that is a very, very sharp white line on the lip of the bottle, and then a round highlight right around the top of the fluid level. And now I'm going to go ahead and basically repeat all those same steps for the red bottle behind it. So again, here you can see I'm coming in with the little spots of white to add the impression of some bubbles in the fluid, and I'm going to glaze back over that with some thinned down red. I believe in this case I use Citadel Khador red base, though Mephiston red would be equally good. Now, if you've been watching either my live streams or my YouTube tutorials for any length of time at all, you probably know by now I consider Khador red base to be a kind of sorcery. And it's really one of those must-have colors, I think, that people, even if you don't really use P3 paints, it's just one of those colors I just can't say enough good things about. So now again, I'm going back in with the white and I'm just cleaning up the sort of the top of that fluid level because the red did just overpower the white a little bit more than it did the green. And I'm coming back in with the really bright white highlight, which is going to basically take the form of a small circle right at the top of the fluid level, and a little tiny hit of white on the lip of the bottle. Now I decided to go ahead and add a second little dot of white to the top right of each of the white dots I've already made. And this can give the impression of either a secondary light source or some sort of internal refraction happening, and it just kind of sells the look of the glass a little bit better. Now I'm finally bringing some highlights onto this cloak. You know, the fun stuff is done, it's time to just get the rest of the grunt work out of the way. Here I'm using a mix of Sotek Green and Temple Guard Blue. The reason for that is it gives me the option to add a further highlight of Temple Guard Blue later on if I want to. I don't end up making use of that option, but I wanted to leave it there until the model was done in case the cloak felt a little bit too flat. Now one of the last things to do here is highlight the pants, and if you remember I did the base coat in Ushabti Bone, so unfortunately there's not a lot of brighter tones I can use, and I end up highlighting them with white. And this is maybe the one part of the model I wish I'd done differently, because it kind of creates a focal point that doesn't need to be there. The pants aren't that important, but they're very, very vibrant. You know, the books, his face, and the wand really should be catching all the attention. Alright, so there's part one of this two-part series, you know, covering all of the color on this model. In the next part, we're going to be covering just the black ink.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed that one, please hit like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you get notifications when I post new videos in the future. If you want to take your support even further, you can do that at patreon.com/epicduck. Every little bit helps keep the lights on and the paint flowing, puts new models on the table so I can make interesting videos, and most importantly, puts a roof over my family's head and food on the table. You can also join me for live painting shows several times a week at twitch.tv/epicduckstudios. I'd love if you came by and watched the show sometime and followed the channel. I want to give a big thank you to everyone who's supported my content over the years, both past and present. It's been an absolutely wild ride, and I couldn't do this without all the wonderful fans and flockers out there. The hobby community is just an amazing group of people, and you really make this worth doing. So let's just keep on doing this together, making more content, and just being fantastic together for years to come. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, do something epic.